This question is from May June paper 11 2022. Basically, it says that a uniform diving board is held by two fixed rods at point P and Q. A person stands at the end R of the diving board. The forces exerted by the rods on the board are vertical. They're not, specifying the direction. They're just saying that it's vertical. It means that upward direction में भी हो सकती है and downward direction में भी हो सकती है. The board remains in equilibrium. It's a very important point that the boards remain in equilibrium as the person slowly moves towards point Q from NR. So they're trying to say that this man is moving towards point Q from point R, and the board remains the boards remain at equilibrium. So basically, actually question here. The question is basically that you have to find the changes in magnitude of forces on P and Q. So in order to find out what's happening to the magnitude of P to the forces at P and Q, what we will do is हमें पहले एक बहुत important concept लेने की ज़रूरत है, वो ये है कि equilibrium पे हम condition क्या apply करते हैं. Condition apply ये होती है कि जो हमारी clockwise moment होते हैं, they are basically equals to anti-clockwise moment. What is moment? हमें moment का formula पता है. Like moment is basically force into distance. And this distance is basically from pivot. Let's say that this man is standing at point R and the weight is acting downwards. Obviously, we know that weight always acts downward. So weight is acting downwards, and then we have, we consider Q as pivot. Let's say we consider Q as pivot. Why we are considering it as pivot? Because we have to figure out what is happening to the force at P and Q. So हम किसी एक को pivot consider कर लेंगे, because any force which is acting at pivot, we neglect it. Why we neglect it? क्योंकि देखो, at point Q we know that there is a force, but the distance from the pivot is 0 because Q itself is pivot. So जब हम इसका moment find out करेंगे, whatever the force is, we will just multiply it with 0. Obviously the distance is 0. Your answer will be 0. So whatever the force is on pivot, we just neglect it and try to solve it ignoring that force. So let's say let me remove it. Alright, so now we have two forces. One is this one, which is like weight, and it is acting downwards, so it is causing a clockwise moment. And then we have another force which is acting at P, and that is acting downwards, and it is creating an anti-clockwise moment. Alright, so what we can do is, first we will write clockwise moment in terms of forces and distance. Let's say force is W into the distance from the pivot. This is your pivot, right? So we say QR is your distance. It's basically equals to your force. Let's say force is FP into the distance from the pivot is PQ. So we know that this person is basically moving towards Q. It means that this QR, this distance, is actually decreasing, and everything else is constant. Everything else is constant, like the person's weight and the distance of rod P from the pivot, but two things are only changing, and that is the force at P and this distance, the man's distance from pivot. These two quantities are varying. So what we will do is, we will just see that what is happening to QR. QR is the distance from the pivot. When the person is moving towards Q, obviously this QR will decrease. When this QR will decrease, this force at rod P will decrease, because these two quantities are directly proportional to each other. So when QR is decreasing, FP, the force at rod P, will also decrease. So first thing is clear that force P will decrease and decrease. तो ये जो दो ऑप्शन है ये तो वैसे ही एलिमिनेट हो जाएंगे, C and D. We will eliminate C and D. Now what we will do is, in order to find what is happening to the force Q, we will make P the pivot. So let me erase everything. So again, the weight is acting downwards, clockwise moment, and then we are considering this P as pivot, and obviously the force at P we will ignore it, and the force at Q will be downwards and it will cause an anti-clockwise moment. So let's write it down. Clockwise moment again इसकी वजह से हो रही है, और वेट क्या हम assume कर रहे हैं, हम again वही स्टेटमेंट लिखेंगे W into, अब हमारा डिस्टेंस क्या है, इट्स बेसिकली द डिस्टेंस इज PR. PR इसलिए है क्योंकि इसका हम लोग हमें पता तो नहीं है, हम जस्ट अज्यूम कर रहे हैं, तो यहाँ से लेके यहाँ तक PR हमने डिस्टेंस कंसिडर कर लिया. इक्वल्स टू, अब हमारा जो Q है उसका हमारा मोमेंट क्या निकल रहा है, उसकी फोर्स को हम कंसिडर कर लेते हैं FQ इनटू डिस्टेंस विच इज PQ. ठीक है. Since we know that this is constant, again this is changing and this is changing because the distance of the man from the pivot is decreasing. So it will obviously affect the force at Q. Since PR is decreasing, again PR is directly proportional to FQ. So PR is decreasing, FQ is decreasing. So it means that the force at Q is decreasing. So we will choose A option because both are decreasing. So I hope it's clear.